right, welcome back, students. We have Todd Stanson with us. Again, you most likely remember him from the last module on ethics, but we are going to expand this conversation on ethics into what I would consider the bigger picture, where ethics is a big part of it, which is the term governance. And so, Todd, I'm going to let you take it away and explain in your terms how you see governance at an organization. What does that mean? What are some of the components?
Well, as they say, no simple answers to complex questions. I think governance is probably one of the most complex things that we actually might ever get to as audit and risk professionals. But I think certainly really important. I've seen so many definitions, and to me, I try to keep it simple. And I just like to think about it as the set of practices, activities, processes, policies, whatever that laundry list is of things that help an organization function. And it comes out in a lot of different ways, which I know we'll get to in this discussion. But when I think about governance, that's what I think about.
Okay, I like it. And so you've got my mind churning already of things I may have forgotten to include within governance, which is just even the basic 3 lines model. And used to be 3 lines of defense, but now it's called the 3 lines model. And obviously, it is truly the different areas of governance, right, within there. So, what would you, if you had to list some of the components of governance? Like maybe starting with the board of directors or the audit committee, what else would be included in kind of that umbrella of governance per se?
Yeah, and maybe we can even just leverage that kind of 3 lines model, because I think that's a good way, at least structurally, to sort of build that. And I think the things that we talked about in that first line, all of the processes, all of the policies, all of the activities, all of the controls, all these things that we do every day to run an organization. I think that's the foundational component of those. I think the second line are things like when we address some of those first line things, the things that we do to run the organization every day. There are risks as we drive the organization towards achieving its purpose, achieving its mission through its strategy. There's going to be a lot of risks that occur to the business, both favorable, both unfavorable. So the opportunity side of risk and the hazard side of risk. And then the third part of that would be what we would typically call objective assurance, which is what typically internal audit groups look at. So I think that's a key part of that. I'd even like to add what some people would call that 4th line, which in certain industries is much more significant, but you've got external audit resources. Those may be based either in regulatory like SEC, or maybe in legislative and other regulatory like FINRA and financial services, for example. So there's a lot of different components of that. But underlying all of those, we'll go back to ethics, which I think is the foundation that supports all those. Because if that ethical foundation of the organization isn't there, then I think just to further that metaphor, if the foundation's not strong, then the building collapses.
Absolutely. And I like how you said how you brought it into every line, right? And I think that's sometimes what they think of governance as this separate thing, when in fact, every employee within an organization is part of the governance structure. I mean, this is a big, living organism, right? So
absolutely.
And management, which is first line, doing the operations, is should be managing their own risks, right? And then you've got the second line with compliance and security and IT and inspection and all these different areas, that's helping manage the risks too. And it's all rolling up into that governance. And obviously, like you said, us as the 3rd line, And then I love that fourth line analogy with external audit or regulators. That's great.
Yeah, it's huge. And one thing, Joe, I failed to mention, I think it's a really important part of governance, although we implied it in our discussion, is the board. And certainly boards, depending on the organization, can differ, but really that's what boards, they're also a part of governance, but they also look to those other groups to say, is the organization operating as it should?
Yeah. And an internal audit specifically, that's what I really want to drive home is that, I would love if internal audit would be called the corporate conscience of the organization. And I don't know where I got that. For all I know, I could have gotten that from you, Todd, but I love that analogy. Probably one of my previous guest speakers used it, but we're checking to make sure that those governance factors or characteristics are in place, right? Like the board, the charters for the different boards, the policies overarching our organization, ethics just being maybe one of them, the code of conduct, which we mentioned in the last session, whether you have a DE&I program, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or HR programs, performance management. I mean, all of that really it's allowing your organization to function successfully, I think. And I think as internal audit, we get to see all of that, which is kind of an exciting role to be in.
It is.
Yeah, and I'm kind of babbling on here, but I want to get into how you see us being a part of it. We talked about this with ethics specifically. We can obviously try to bring it to life. We can, make sure it's there and our company is using it effectively. We could train on it. We talked about those things. For the bigger picture of governance, we're a piece of it. What else do we do to be involved in it?
Yeah, I think we talked about one, which is that typically what we call the third line, where we are actually a part of governance. And I think that's the unique part of governance is a risk function typically sits in that second line. An audit function typically sits in the third line, or an internal audit function. So I think that's probably the primary. But I think one of the other ways that an audit or a risk group can get involved in governance is really being a thought partner to all of those, various stakeholders, from the board all the way to the frontline manager, because there's sometimes in my experience, so I'd love to hear, Joe, if what your experience in this area is. But what I have found is that people typically don't think about governance as this broader system. They only think about their little component of it. So I think one thing we could do is remind all of the people who we might be interacting with that they are a part of this bigger governance system and how important it is. And I especially think that's critical for people who are at lower levels in an organization, because they may not have the visibility to those more senior level or board level conversations. So I think that's one other way to get involved, is just to remind people how they fit in, and why it may seem like that something you do like a reconciliation doesn't seem all that important, but it really is when you think about it in the whole of the system of governance. So I think that's a really big one. And then, of course, getting back to just being a part of that third line, there's a lot of things that boards and senior leaders think are happening, and we can answer that question: are they really happening? So is the program functioning as it's intended to function, so that the things that we think are happening, we can say yes they are, or no they're not, or look at it more from an efficiency standpoint to say they are happening, but perhaps we could do a better job and be more efficient and perhaps cost effective with it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we are in, and of course, I'm trying to sell the internal audit profession to my students here a little bit, but we are in this unique position to be able to see all these different areas of the company, and they may not have, they're not privy to see each other. And so I do think we can kind of bring, better practices to the table on, maybe a policy in one area looks way better and is working way better than in another area, and kind of bring, I hate the word best practices, because that means you've reached the best, right? So better practices is what I always say. We can always bring better practices to the table. And like you said, it when you were talking, I kept thinking about the silos that sometimes we build within organizations, and how can we break down those silos so that they do know this is a whole governance, structure, versus we don't have towers here, right?
Right.
We're all one
Right.
tower. So
Yeah, I think you make a really great point there, because one of the pitfalls of talking about governance in terms of the lines model is that we almost have this tendency to say there are these separate silos, but they're really not. That's just a way to talk about it. But hopefully that's not the way that it actually is, because if it's not seen as this holistic system where everybody has the same goal. I mean, one of the things I know that I say in all of my roles, my audit role, my risk role, and my ethics role is, we all are on the same team and we all have the same goal, which was we want the organization to be successful, but we want the organization to be successful in the right way. We all just have a different part to play in doing that, and we look at it with a different lens, but we all are part of this one system of governance.
yeah, no, I love that. And you just use the word successful. So I want to ask you and all the students a question. So I'm going to kind of put you on a spot here. I like to do this for some of my trainings. I am going to ask you what you think makes a world-class successful organization. And I'm going to give you three options. Okay, you ready?
Okay.
Okay. Option A, is it their finances, their revenue, their sales, their bottom line? So profit, that's A. Is it B, their product, their service, maybe their strategy that they employ, their operations? That's option B. Or is it C, their culture, their governance practices, their people, their leaders, their ethics? What do you think, A, B, or C, makes a world-class successful organization?
My vote would be C.
Okay, so that is, okay, you picked what everybody picks, right? I'd say 95%, if not more than that, if I had to put a number to it, pick C. And then I always challenge us, especially when I'm doing this for internal auditors, and say, but where do we spend our time auditing? Is it A, maybe yes, for external audit, right? We're looking at those numbers. B, yep, we get into operations and strategy as internal audit. What I'm trying to do is say we all need to be keeping C in mind, because we all agree that that's what makes a successful organization. And so that's one of my favorite questions to ask, because I feel like it does persuade auditors and really any leader that we need to be focusing more on C, and how can we do that together? So and governance is the answer in my mind.
I completely agree with you, and I like the question, and it's a great challenge to all of us. And I know something that, once you've been in this world for a long time, you do start to see that we do focus most of our time on A and B, and those who try to push that, it is a challenge. But once you do that, you start to see the benefits of it. I think it works well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can get into, the way our company hires. I was mentioning to Todd, just for the students' benefit, that one of the things I've been providing is some good interview questions around ethics and integrity to some of my clients, and just even having auditors go into an area that they're auditing and say, hey, would you mind if I reviewed your list of hiring questions? Because we need to remember that people and the ethics within those people are what's building our organizations. And so we got to start at the beginning, right? So just like Todd said in the last module on ethics, it's foundational to everything that we do. So it's foundational to governance as well, the ethics and integrity piece. So, well, any last words on governance, or anything you want to share with the students? And then I'm going to ask for your best piece of advice for the students too after that, if you have anything.
Oh, okay. No, happy to do that. I think I guess the last thing I'd say is maybe just in summary is, a lot of times people will push back on, can you quote unquote audit governance? And I won't go too far afield here, I promise, Joe, but I believe you can audit anything. And I think governance is one of the most important things to audit, because of all the things we've talked about today, it being foundational to the success of a company. So I would just say that even if it sometimes feels like something that might be difficult to review, it's possible.
Yeah, I love that. So, hey, one more of my favorite quote, Todd, because I know you'll love this one. Emotions aren't noise, they're data. How about that for a quote,
I
right?
like it. I
Isn't it
like it.
good?
That's
I think
great.
just along what you said, sometimes auditors shy away from this because it's the soft stuff. It seems subjective, and how do we report on it? And I'm just a big proponent, like you could audit anything, you can turn anything into data. And when I read that quote, I was like, oh my gosh, that's perfect for this.
Yeah, love that.
Oceans
Yeah,
aren't noise, they're data. Everything is data. So it's all auditable, right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, any advice for students that we can leave them with?
Well, gosh, I guess my one piece, I don't know if I'm really qualified to give advice, but what I would say is something that's really been helpful to me is never stop learning. And I know that when you're in the midst of what you're in now, continuing to learn might seem like something that at some point I want to take a pause on that. But I have found that if you keep learning, you'll keep wanting to learn, and that just keeps you curious. And if you stop being curious, especially if you're in a risk or an audit profession, or really any profession, if you stop being curious, I think that's the day that things start to go sideways. So I would just encourage you to, always look for something. And this may sound like a t-shirt slogan, but I think it works. And it's, at the end of every day, say, what did I learn? And I think if you start doing that, then you will start looking for things to learn and looking for things that you did learn. So that would be what I would say as an encouragement.
Yeah, I love that. It's like if you look at yourself last year and you didn't learn anything or you didn't do anything different, then you're probably going to be disappointed. So, how do you want to look back on things?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
love it. Perfect. Well, Todd, thank you so much for spending some time with the students. And yeah, we just really appreciate having you and your
Great.
wisdom.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, Joe.